Welcome, curious minds, to the Deep Dives. Today, we're really embarking on quite an ambitious journey, I think. We're tackling one of the most provocative questions of our time. What's actually next for humanity?
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is. And we're diving deep into Yuval Noah Harari's groundbreaking work, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow.
It's a truly profound look, isn't it? Not just where we've been, but where we seem to be undeniably headed. Harari really challenges us with this idea that after largely overcoming the traditional scourges, famine, plague, war, humanity set its sights on something even more audacious.
Right, this new agenda, achieving immortality, universal bliss, and even, get this, divinity.
Exactly. And this deep dive, hopefully, will guide you chapter by chapter through the major themes, the really big ideas in this incredible book. We'll try to extract the key insights and probably fundamentally challenge your perceptions of the future along the way.
Yeah, that's the goal. Our mission today is to explore Harari's central and, frankly, pretty unsettling argument. How the very tools and ideologies that propelled Homo sapiens to global dominance, science, humanism, are now kind of paradoxically pushing us towards a post-human future.
It's a fascinating twist.
It is. So you'll hear about everything from emotions that can be engineered to the surprisingly fragile concept of free will and how algorithms might soon know you better than you actually know yourself. So really, get ready to question everything you thought you knew about being human, because this deep dive is, I think, going to take you to some really unexpected places.
Homo sapiens conquers the world, overcoming ancient scourges and setting new goals. 1.1, Chapter 1, The End of Famine, Plague, and War, a New Reality.
Okay, so Harari kicks things off with a claim that honestly sounds almost absurd when you just glance at today's headlines. He argues that humanity is actually bringing famine, plague, and war under control. It feels incredibly counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially with all the ongoing conflicts, the crises we see globally. What's his core argument for this? It seems so surprising, especially when so many people still grapple with these very real issues.
It certainly seems that way on the surface, yeah. But look, Harari isn't saying these problems are completely gone. That would be naive.
Right.
He's arguing the nature of the threat has fundamentally shifted, and crucially, our capacity to deal with them has reached an unprecedented level. For him, the key insight is that humanity's response is no longer one of, sheer helplessness. We actually possess the tools now to manage, if not entirely eliminate, these challenges.
Okay.
And he takes us on this historical tour, really, to show this transformation, starting with famine.
From biological poverty line to obesity epidemics.
You see, for most of history, and this is hard for us to truly grasp, most people lived below what Harari calls a biological poverty line.
Biological poverty line.
Yeah, this wasn't just, a tough life. It was a constant, brutal, day in, day out struggle for enough calories just to survive. Widespread malnutrition wasn't an exception, it was the absolute norm. It directly limited human populations, lifespans. It was this ever-present specter dictating so much of human existence.
But today, wow, that narrative is completely flipped, hasn't it?
Yeah.
For so many people, particularly in developed nations, it's not too little food, but actually too much of the wrong kind, sparking what we now clearly recognize as an obesity epidemic. It's such a striking contrast.
Absolutely. It's almost jarring. Consider this data point Harari uses. In 2012, globally, around 56 million people died. Now, a significant chunk of those, 1.5 million, died from diabetes, a condition often linked directly to overconsumption and diet.
Right.
In contrast, only about 120,000 died in wars that year. And a similar number, roughly 120,000, died from actual malnutrition.
Wait, obesity is killing 3 times as many people as malnutrition.
That's the statistic.
Yeah.
3 times as many. So what this boils down to, Harari argues, is a fundamental victory over natural famine. Now, obviously, issues of food distribution, political instability, creating artificial scarcity, those certainly persist, absolutely.
Of course.
But our biggest food-related health challenges on a global scale have inverted. We've moved from this age-old struggle against scarcity to grappling with the problems of abundance. It's a truly monumental, if kind of paradoxical, shift in the human story.
From divine wrath to engineered threats.
Okay, so famine is one thing. Then there's plague, disease, epidemics. Historically, these were just terrifying forces of nature, weren't they? They decimated populations with horrifying speed. You mentioned the Black Death earlier, caused by Yersinia pestis in the 1330s.
Unbelievable devastation.
Right. Killed between 75 and 200 million people.
Right.
Wiped out over a quarter of Eurasia's population in less than 2 decades. The city of Florence alone lost half its inhabitants, and ancient societies, they were simply helpless.
Utterly helpless.
I mean, you read about it, the Mayans blamed evil gods. Aztecs attributed it to black magic or angry deities like Tezcatlipoca. Their advised cures were things like prayers, cold baths, rubbing bitumen on yourself, or squashed beetles.
Yeah, basically useless.
Completely ineffective, leading to just horror, rotting corpses in the streets, houses collapsing on bodies.
It paints such a grim picture of human vulnerability back then. But our approach now, it's become radically scientific, hasn't it? Doctors, scientists, they no longer rely on divine intervention or guesswork. They accumulate knowledge, share it, build on it, leading to increasingly effective medicines, vaccines, crucial public health measures.
Right, the scientific method applied to disease.
Exactly. And Harari suggests that even if we face, say, much more resilient germs in 2050, superbugs medicine is expected to deal with them more efficiently because of this continuous process of discovery. Think about new antibiotic types announced even recently, like in 2015. So yeah, the scales have definitely tipped in humanity's favor against natural epidemics.
Okay, that's the hopeful side of the coin. But then Harari throws this major curveball. He argues that biotechnology, the very thing saving us, simultaneously turns humans into an unprecedented threat. How so?
Well, the very same tools, the same knowledge that cures illnesses, could potentially allow armies or terrorist groups or maybe even rogue states to engineer even more terrible diseases and doomsday pathogens.
Oh, wow.
He speculates, and it is speculation, but based on current trends, that future major epidemics will likely be human-made, perhaps in the service of some ruthless ideology. It's a genuinely chilling thought.
Yeah.
We might actually come to miss the era of purely natural plagues.
That's deeply unsettling. We went from being helpless victims of nature to potentially becoming the orchestrators of our own biological downfall.
Breaking the law of the jungle.
And then we come to the third big one, war. Historically, war was just constant. It was almost taken for granted as part of the human condition. Peace was seen as temporary, precarious.
The default state was conflict or the threat of it.
Absolutely. From the Stone Age onward, everyone knew their neighbors might invade, slaughter, occupy at basically any moment. War was always an option, always factored into future plans. It was just a predictable, if brutal, part of life. But Harari argues, and again, it's a bold claim, that the law of the jungle in international relations has been fundamentally broken.
Okay, that's another one that feels counterintuitive. I mean, most people would point immediately to ongoing conflicts, geopolitical tensions, huge military budgets, and say, wait a minute, war is still very much with us. How does he possibly support this idea that it's no longer the constant threat it once was?
He points again to the data, the long-term trends. Wars have become demonstrably rarer than ever in most parts of the world. Look at the numbers. Human violence caused about 15% of all deaths in ancient agricultural societies. That dropped to 5% in the 20th century, even with 2 world wars.
Wow, only 5% in the 20th century.
Yeah, still huge, but a significant drop. And in the early 21st century, it's responsible for only about 1% of global mortality. And here's that startling comparison again. In 2012, 620,000 people died from human violence. That includes 120,000 in war, 500,000 in crime. Meanwhile, 800,000 committed suicide, and 1.5 million died of diabetes.
So what does this tell us? Harari's provocative conclusion is that sugar is now more dangerous than gunpowder.
That's the line.
Sugar is more dangerous than gunpowder. Wow, that's a statistic that really makes you stop and reevaluate priorities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what's driving this new peace, as he calls it? Is it just a temporary lull or something more fundamental?
Harari identifies 2 key reasons for this really profound shift. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, nuclear weapons. They transformed war between superpowers into what he calls a mad act of collective suicide.
Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
MAD.
Exactly. The sheer destructive power forced nations to find peaceful, or at least non-catastrophic, ways to resolve conflicts, because all-out war between major powers became essentially unwinnable, unthinkable. Secondly, and this is maybe less obvious but just as important, the global economy has shifted. It's moved away from primarily material assets, gold mines, wheat fields, oil wells, towards knowledge.
Information, technology, intellectual property.
Precisely. You can conquer oil fields, sure, but you can't conquer knowledge in the same way. Sending tanks into Silicon Valley doesn't get you the next breakthrough algorithm. This makes traditional conquest much less profitable, drastically reducing the economic incentive for large-scale conflict between developed nations.
So this new economic reality restricts major conflicts primarily to regions still focused on older, material-based economies, like parts of the Middle East or Central Africa, where controlling resources like oil or coltan mines might still be a primary driver.
That seems to be the pattern, yes. Like Rwanda seizing coltan mines in the Congo back in 1998, that's an example of the older model of resource warfare.
So because of these huge shifts, nuclear deterrence and the knowledge economy, Harari argues that a growing segment of humanity now sees large-scale war between major powers as simply inconceivable. Governments and corporations actually plan their futures without seriously factoring in war as a likely event.
Think about it. Mercedes plans its sales strategy in Eastern Europe without really worrying about a German conquest of Poland disrupting things. Brazil's government isn't allocating billions in its budget for a potential invasion of Uruguay.
Right, it's just not on the radar in the same way.
Exactly. Now, exceptions exist, of course. Tensions remain. But this new peace is a profound global factor. So this leads to the next big question. If humanity has indeed brought these ancient threats of famine, plague, and war under unprecedented levels of control, what does it then choose to focus its immense power and ingenuity on? Harari says we're aiming for something much, much bigger. 1.2, Chapter 2. The new human agenda, immortality, bliss, divinity.
Right, so with these old existential problems seemingly, well, maybe not solved, but fundamentally managed, humanity's new agenda, according to Harari, is far more ambitious. He posits that we're now actively pursuing immortality, universal bliss, and even divinity. I mean, it sounds completely like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does, straight out of a novel. But the book argues, quite convincingly, I think, that it's already in motion. It's happening not through some grand declaration, but through our scientific and technological advancements, pushing the boundaries bit by bit. 1.2.1, Overcoming Death, the pursuit of immortality and the infinite market. Harari makes a really critical distinction here. He differentiates between true immortality, living forever like a god, unchanging, and what he calls immortality.
Immortality. Okay, what's the difference?
It's not about achieving some eternal static existence. It's more about continually extending life decade by decade through relentless technological intervention. It's about beating death not with a single magic bullet, but with an ongoing series of upgrades, repairs, and regeneration therapies.
So it's less like finding the fountain of youth and more like a subscription service for perpetual youth and health. You just keep getting the updates.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. A subscription service. Optimistic forecasts from experts like Ray Kurzweil or Aubrey de Grey, controversial figures perhaps, but influential, suggest that people with, and this is key, a healthy body and a healthy bank account in 2050 could have a serious shot at this immortality.
Healthy body, healthy bank account. That's crucial.
Absolutely. This would likely involve regular makeover treatments, maybe every 10 years or so. These wouldn't just cure illnesses, they'd regenerate tissues, upgrade body parts, hands, eyes, maybe even brains using new medicines, genetic therapies, nanobots, gadgets, whatever the latest tech is.
And the idea is that before the next treatment is even due, doctors will have already invented a whole plethora of new, even more effective solutions, right? So you're always staying one step ahead of decay.
That's the theory. That's the hope driving the research. And it's important to understand, as you touched on before, that modern medicine up to now hasn't really extended our natural maximum lifespan much. People like Galileo, Newton, Michelangelo lived long lives into their 70s or 80s without any of our modern medical interventions.
Right, they hit the natural ceiling.
Pretty much. What modern medicine has primarily done is prevent premature deaths from disease, infections, violence, childbirth complications, and so on. It's let more people reach that natural ceiling. But Harari says the new goal, the Homo Deus goal, is to actually smash through that ceiling, to push beyond these natural biological limits.
And the economic driver for this is massive, isn't it?
Oh, completely. This quest to outsmart death and regain youth represents a virtually infinite market. Harari asks that provocative question. How much would you personally pay to have your 25-year-old body back with all your current knowledge? Exactly. The willingness of enough wealthy customers to pay whatever it takes ensures massive ongoing investment in this field. It's driven by both the genuine allure of scientific discovery and, let's be honest, the potential for immense profits. It's this powerful economic engine churning behind a seemingly futuristic dream. 1.2, achieving bliss, redefining happiness through biochemistry.
Okay, so maybe we managed to extend life significantly, achieve immortality. What's next on humanity's grand to-do list? Harari says it's happiness itself, but again, not in the way philosophers or poets used to talk about it. He argues it's transformed from this philosophical ideal into a scientific, almost clinical pursuit. What does he mean when he defines happiness and suffering as nothing but different balances of bodily sensations?
Well, he's really stripping away the romanticism, the poetry, you see. From a life sciences perspective, our reactions, our feelings, our emotions are ultimately responses to internal biochemical signals and sensations, not necessarily the external events themselves. Depression, anger, these aren't just abstract concepts. They're felt physically as unpleasant bodily sensations. We literally say we burn with anger because that's how it can physically manifest.
Okay.
So this scientific perspective suggests that if we can control these internal sensations biochemically through drugs, genetic manipulation, maybe direct brain stimulation, we can essentially control happiness itself. It's a very utilitarian, almost mechanical view of something we usually consider profound and elusive.
It makes you wonder then, are we really all that different from those rats in that famous kind of disturbing experiment, the ones with electrodes implanted in their brain's pleasure centers?
Oh, the Olds and Milner experiment,
They
yeah.
just chose to endlessly press a pedal for that jolt of excitement, right? Over food, over water, even to the point of collapse from hunger and exhaustion.
Exactly. That experiment vividly illustrates how powerfully agreeable sensations can drive behavior, overriding even basic survival instincts. But here's the crucial catch Harari points out. These exciting sensations of the race are just as transient, just as fleeting as the blissful sensations of victory. Like those rats, Harari notes that, thrill seekers, Don Juans, business tycoons chasing the next deal, even gamers grinding for the next level, they need a new kick every day.
The hedonic treadmill.
Precisely. Expectations constantly adapt. Yesterday's challenges and triumphs quickly become today's boring routine. So this leaves us, according to Harari, with two main potential solutions to the enduring problem of achieving lasting happiness.
Okay, what are they?
One is the biochemical solution. Basically, develop ever more sophisticated products, treatments, maybe even genetic tweaks for an unending stream of pleasant sensations. Keep the dopamine flowing. The other is what he calls the Buddhist solution, which focuses on fundamentally reducing our craving for pleasant sensations by observing them for what they are, ephemeral and meaningless vibrations, and thereby losing interest in constantly pursuing them.
So manipulate the biochemistry or change your relationship to it.
Exactly. And given humanity's general track record, our eagerness for a quick fix, our focus on external solutions, Harari concludes, perhaps a bit cynically, that we overwhelmingly favor the biochemical solution. We want the pill, not the meditation cushion. 1.2.3 Attaining Divinity, the gradual upgrade of Homo sapiens. And this pursuit, extending life, engineering bliss, it logically leads to an even more profound, even more audacious ambition. If we can conquer death and master happiness, Harari suggests the ultimate goal becomes, effectively, divinity. Not becoming gods in the mythological sense, perhaps, but achieving godlike capabilities.
Right. Control over life, death, happiness. Creation itself, maybe.
Yes. But again, he doesn't envision this as some sudden apocalyptic event like God is descending from the heavens. Rather, he sees it as a gradual, almost imperceptible, step-by-step upgrading of Homo sapiens into what he terms Homo Deus. And this involves an increasing merger with our own technology, with robots, with computers, with AI.
So it's not one grand singular leap into godhood, but rather a million tiny choices we make every single day that are pushing us collectively in that direction. Like maybe granting your smartphone more control over your schedule, your health data, or taking a new antidepressant that subtly alters your mood chemistry.
Precisely. He writes that we will gradually change first one of their features and then another and another until they will no longer be human. It's evolution by intelligent design, our own design. Think about the potential of cyborg capabilities, for instance. Unlike purely organic bodies, which require direct physical contact between parts. An elephant can't have its brain in India and its eyes in China.
Right, obvious.
Cyborgs could potentially exist, or at least operate, in numerous places at the same time. He gives the example of a cyborg doctor. Imagine her sitting in a Stockholm office, but equipped with a super fast internet connection, maybe sophisticated bionic hands and eyes. She could potentially perform emergency surgeries simultaneously in Tokyo, Chicago, and maybe even a space station on Mars.
Wow. Or even just directly connect your mind to the surgical instruments, bypassing the physical hands altogether.
Exactly. The possibilities become mind-boggling. And this all sounds, again, like pure science fiction, but Harari highlights why this process might be almost unstoppable. He calls it the no brakes problem. Why can't we just decide collectively to stop this trajectory if it seems too dangerous?
Yeah, why can't we just hit the brakes?
Well, he argues there are three incredibly powerful forces pushing us forward, making it very hard to stop. Firstly, there's widespread ignorance. No single expert, no politician, no CEO truly understands all the interconnected fields driving this change. AI, nanotech, big data, genetics, neuroscience. They're all advancing so rapidly, so no one sees the full picture, and therefore no one really knows where the brakes might even be, let alone how to apply them.
Okay, that makes sense. Too complex, too distributed.
Second, there's a fundamental unwillingness to stop. Who genuinely wants to halt the pursuit of cures for cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia? Who wants to stop research into new, cleaner energy sources? These are almost universally desired advancements tied intrinsically to the very technologies pushing us towards Homo Deus. Stopping the bad stuff means stopping the good stuff, too.
It's all tangled together.
And thirdly, there's immense competitive pressure. If one nation, say the US, decides to put strict limits on genetic engineering or AI development, but another nation, maybe China, pushes ahead full steam, well, the nation holding back risks falling behind dramatically, both militarily and economically. It creates this relentless pressure to keep innovating just to keep up.
It's a global race, essentially.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really, really chilling, especially when we think about things like designer babies and genetic engineering. Harari talks about in vitro selection, where parents could, theoretically, fertilize multiple eggs and then choose the embryo with the best combination of desired genes, intelligence, health, looks.
Yeah, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis taken to an extreme.
And he speculates that once stem cell research makes creating human embryos relatively cheap and easy, parents could potentially select an optimal baby from maybe hundreds of candidates, all carrying their DNA. This could lead, he warns, to superhumans, or a creepy dystopia after just a few generations.
It's a stark possibility, and we're already seeing the technical feasibility, even in small steps. He mentions things like replacing defective mitochondrial DNA to create a so-called three-parent baby, which happened with Alana Sareenan back in 2000, although the practice was quickly banned in the US. But it shows the technology exists, the proof of concept is there.
Right.
So these new goals, immortality, engineered bliss, godlike upgrades, they profoundly change our relationship with nature, with our own bodies, and with ourselves. And they force us to ask this really fundamental question. What exactly is this human spark that we seem so determined to transcend or upgrade? What makes us unique, if anything at all, as we stand on the cusp of potentially re-engineering ourselves?
Homo sapiens gives meaning to the world, our unique capacity for fictions. 2.1, Chapter 3, the human spark distinguishing ourselves from animals.
Okay, so before we fully transform into Homo Deus, Harari wisely pauses. He steps back and asks, what actually makes Homo sapiens so powerful and, well, so unique in the first place? We humans, we tend to assume a superior moral status, don't we? But is that really justified simply because we're stronger or more intelligent than other animals? This part of the book, it really makes you think hard about our fundamental place in the world.
He really does.
His core idea here, as I understand it, is that our incredible power comes not from some inherent individual superiority like a smarter brain in each person, but from our collective ability to cooperate on a massive scale. And that ability, crucially, relies on our shared fictions, our stories. And this realization challenges our basic understanding of consciousness and the self.
Absolutely. It gets right to the heart of our self-perception. 2.1.1, the basis of human superiority and our animal model. Harari immediately throws down the gauntlet, questioning our easy assumptions. He asks, does greater power, for instance, the power the U.S. wields over Afghanistan, automatically imply a greater intrinsic value of the lives involved? In practice, American lives are often valued more, certainly in American policy. But does that mean they should be, from some objective, universal moral standpoint? It's uncomfortable to confront.
It is.
And what's particularly thought-provoking, maybe even disturbing, is Harari's suggestion that our current relationship with animals serves as the best model for understanding potential future relations between upgraded superhumans and ordinary humans.
Oof. So how we treat less intelligent animal cousins today might, in a chilling way, predict how super intelligent cyborgs or genetically enhanced elites might treat the rest of us tomorrow.
That's it.
Yeah, that's a truly uncomfortable parallel to draw.
It's meant to be uncomfortable, I think. He wants us to examine our own behavior. Homo sapiens, he points out, has already changed the global ecosystem in ways that are radical and unprecedented. Our impact is comparable to massive geological events like ice ages or tectonic plate movements. Within just a century or so, our impact could actually surpass that of the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago.
That's staggering to think about.
But here's the crucial difference Harari highlights. That asteroid, devastating as it was, didn't fundamentally change the rules of natural selection. Life adapted, evolved, continued according to those rules. Humankind, however, is poised not just to impact the ecosystem, but potentially to replace natural selection entirely with intelligent design, and maybe even replace organic life itself with inorganic forms. That's a level of impact, a level of power that demands we truly understand what makes us tick, what our spark really is. 2.1.2, the enigma of consciousness and the problem of the soul. So this raises the absolutely critical question: what truly is that spark? What is consciousness? And science, perhaps surprisingly to many, knows remarkably little about the mind and consciousness. It's still one of the biggest mysteries. Harari points out, for instance, that the traditional religious concept of an indivisible eternal soul clashes directly with modern evolutionary theory.
Oh, so?
Well, think about how natural selection works. It creates complex structures like the human eye through slow, step-by-step mutations and modifications of parts over vast periods. An indivisible, immutable soul, by its very definition, has no parts to evolve or modify. So its creation through the known mechanisms of natural selection becomes fundamentally problematic, scientifically speaking.
Right, it doesn't fit the evolutionary model.
Yeah.
And this uncertainty about consciousness goes way back, doesn't it? You mentioned philosophers like René Descartes in the 17th century.
Yeah, Descartes famously posited that only humans possess true minds, capable of feeling and craving. He argued that other animals were essentially mindless automata, complex biological robots but without inner experience. And that wasn't just an abstract philosophical view, it had chilling real-world consequences. It enabled doctors and scientists of the time to dissect live dogs without anesthetics, without moral scruples, because they genuinely believed the animals couldn't feel pain, they were just mechanisms reacting.
It's horrifying to think about.
It is. And even today, Harari notes, many people still argue that animals lack consciousness altogether, or at least possess only an inferior, less meaningful type. But the scientific puzzle deepens even when we look at ourselves. Most up-to-date neuroscientific theories suggest that sensations and emotions are, at their core, biochemical data processing algorithms. Our brains are electrochemical machines.
Okay.
Even in humans, something like 99% of our bodily activities, muscle movements, hormonal secretions, regulating heartbeat, digestion, all happen completely unconsciously. We're not aware of them. So Harari asks the killer question: if the brain functions perfectly well via electrical signals and chemical reactions, why is feeling fear necessary? Why do we need the subjective experience? What evolutionary function do subjective experiences actually perform if a complex chain of electrochemical reactions can trigger the appropriate survival response, like running away, entirely without them?
So essentially, if a sophisticated robot can react appropriately to danger based on sensor input and programming, why would it also need to feel the subjective pang of fear, it seems?
Right.
Superfluous from a purely functional perspective.
Exactly. It's a fundamental question that science really struggles with. If conscious experiences, subjective feelings, are truly essential for survival or function, they must somehow be representable mathematically. They must fit within an algorithm. Yet, in the vast realm of mathematics and computer science, no data processing system we've ever created needs to feel pain, pleasure, anger, or love to function effectively. This hard problem of consciousness, this gap between objective brain processes and subjective inner experience, remains a huge mystery. And it's central to understanding what, if anything, truly makes our spark special. 2.1.3, questioning self-consciousness in animals.
Okay, so maybe animals are conscious, maybe they feel pain and pleasure, but some might still argue, well, they lack self-consciousness, right? That unique sense of I, of being a distinct individual aware of itself that we humans possess so strongly. But Harari suggests even that distinction gets pretty blurry when you look closely.
It does get blurry. For example, dogs clearly distinguish the odor of their own urine from that of other dogs, reacting quite differently. They know which smell is theirs. They certainly grab food for themselves, not just randomly. This suggests at least a basic, embodied level of self-awareness, a sense of me versus not me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the famous case of Clever Hans, which serves as a great cautionary tale. Clever Hans was a horse in Germany around the turn of the 20th century who appeared to be able to perform arithmetic. tapping out answers with his hoof.
Right, the mathematical horse.
Exactly. But it turned out Hans wasn't actually doing math. He was incredibly uncannily adept at observing the subtle, often unconscious body language and facial expressions of his human questioners. He'd start tapping, watch the person intently, and stop tapping precisely when he sensed their tension peak as he reached the correct number. They'd subtly relax, maybe nod slightly, and he'd stop.
So he was reading the humans, not the numbers.
Precisely. It shows how easily we humans can misinterpret animal capabilities and project our own kind of complex, abstract, human-like consciousness onto them. What we perceive as deep self-consciousness or complex reasoning might often be explainable by sophisticated observation, associative learning, and highly attuned responses to environmental cues, rather than a rich inner monologue like ours. It really challenges us to look beyond our own anthropocentric biases when assessing other minds. 2.1.4, the domestication paradox, ignored needs of farm animals. And this discussion about animal minds leads us directly to a crucial and often brutal point about human impact. How agriculture, the very foundation of our civilization, has paradoxically created immense systemic suffering for billions of domesticated animals. And this suffering arises, Harari argues, precisely because we ignore their inherited wild needs.
How so? What are these wild needs?
Well, these animals, cows, pigs, chickens, they retain a whole suite of physical, emotional, and social needs hardwired into them from their wild ancestors. Needs that were essential for survival in the wild, but which become redundant, even inconvenient on modern industrial farms.
Things like roaming, foraging, socializing, mother-infant bonding.
Exactly. And farmers, operating under economic pressures, often ignore these deep-seated needs without suffering any direct financial penalty. They can lock animals in tiny cages where they can barely move, mutilate their horns or tails without anesthetic, separate mothers from their offspring almost immediately after birth, and selectively breed animals into monstrosities that grow unnaturally fast or produce unnatural amounts of milk or eggs, often at great cost to the animal's well-being. The animals suffer terribly, but they still manage to survive and reproduce, which is also the only metric that matters in the system.
But wouldn't evolution, over thousands of years of domestication, eventually eliminate these redundant needs if they no longer contribute to survival on the farm? That seems like it should happen.
That's the paradox, isn't it? Evolutionary theory states that instincts, drives, and emotions evolved over millennia, specifically for survival and reproduction in a particular environment. But when the environmental pressures suddenly disappear or radically change, like moving from a forest to a factory farm, those deep-seated drives do not disappear with them, at least not quickly. Evolution works much slower than cultural and technological change.
Ah, okay. The software hasn't caught up with the new hardware environment.
That's a good analogy.
Mhm.
Pigs, for instance, inherited their intelligence, their intense curiosity, their strong urges to socialize and explore from wild boars who absolutely needed those traits to find food, avoid predators, and navigate complex social structures. Those deep sensory and emotional structures haven't fundamentally changed much since the Stone Age, Harari argues, despite the superficial alterations we've bred into them, like making cows produce vastly more milk. They're still, in essence, wild animals trapped in an alien, often cruel environment, driven by ancient instincts they can't fulfill.
It's a really striking point about our ethical blind spots, how easily we compartmentalize. You mentioned the Nayaka people in South India who have this interesting distinction. They differentiate between Manson living beings they perceive as having unique personalities, like wild elephants, bears, even certain forest trees, and non-Manson entities like domestic cows, chickens, or tea bushes, which they see more as resources. That shows a cultural recognition of intrinsic value based perhaps on perceived wildness, autonomy, maybe even consciousness.
It does suggest alternative ways of viewing the living world, and Harari adds a sobering historical context. Let's not forget that in most agricultural societies throughout history, humans themselves were often treated with appalling brutality, whipped, enslaved, tortured, executed, seen as mere property by ruling elites. In such a context, ignoring the feelings of cows and chickens was hardly surprising, was it? Our historical treatment of animals stems directly, he argues, from our perceived uniqueness and our exercise of power. And this brings us squarely back to the source of that unique human power, our unparalleled ability to create and believe in shared fictions, shared stories that bind us together, a capacity that Harari argues is our true defining superpower. Hebrew 2, Chapter 4. The story tells us how fictions shape our reality.
Right, this is where it all truly comes together for Harari, isn't it? This idea of stories. He argues, quite radically, that Homo sapiens rules the world not because we have superior individual intelligence compared to, say, a chimpanzee or a dolphin, but because we alone live in what he calls a triple-layered reality. A reality built fundamentally on stories about abstract concepts like money, gods, nations, corporations.
Exactly.
These shared fictions, while not objectively real like a rock or a river, are incredibly powerful intersubjective realities. They exist because we collectively believe in them, and it's these shared beliefs that enable large-scale, flexible human cooperation, the kind no other animal can achieve. This cooperation, fueled by stories, is what drives our history and defines our collective goals.
It's a profound insight into what makes us different. 2.2.1 Triple-layered reality. Objective, subjective, intersubjective. To really get our heads around this, Harari carefully defines these three layers of reality. First, you have objective reality. This stuff exists independently of what humans think or believe. Think trees, rocks, rivers, atoms, gravity. They're just there, whether we acknowledge them or not.
Okay, straightforward enough.
Second, there's subjective reality. This encompasses all the experiences happening within an individual's consciousness. Your specific fear right now, your joy, your private desires, your headache, these are real experiences, but they are unique to your
My
consciousness.
inner world. Got it.
But then there's the third, and for Harari, the most crucial layer for understanding human society: intersubjective reality. This exists purely because many people collectively believe in it. Think about money. A dollar bill is just a piece of paper objectively, but we all believe it has value, so it functions as valuable. Same goes for gods. Nations like France or Japan, human rights laws, and corporations like Google or Toyota. They aren't physical objects like trees, nor are they just individual feelings. They are shared beliefs, shared stories that create a common framework allowing millions, even billions of strangers to cooperate.
And the really powerful point Harari makes is how, as history unfolded, the actual impact of these intersubjective entities, these gods, nations, and corporations, grew at the expense of rivers, fears, and desires. Our fictional creations now literally dam rivers, shape our deepest personal anxieties, and dictate our life choices.
It's an incredible inversion, isn't it? The fictions became more powerful than the objective realities, and the development of writing, he argues, played an absolutely critical role in expanding the power and complexity of this intersubjective realm. Before writing, stories were limited by the capacity of human memory. You could only maintain relatively simple myths and social structures.
Right, there's only so much you can pass down orally.
Exactly. Writing enabled the creation of extremely long and intricate stories. Think religious scriptures, legal codes, complex financial systems, which could be stored externally on clay tablets, papyri, scrolls, eventually books and hard drives. This allowed for much more complex fictions and consequently much larger and more complex human societies to form and coordinate around these shared, written-down beliefs. It allowed us to organize on a scale completely unprecedented in the animal kingdom. 2.2.2 The Power of Cooperation, Lessons from History and Revolution. And Harari masterfully illustrates the absolutely critical importance of this fiction-fueled, large-scale cooperation using compelling historical examples. Take ancient Rome conquering Greece. He argues it wasn't because individual Romans were inherently smarter or braver than individual Greeks. It was because the Romans cooperated more effectively. Their highly disciplined legions, operating under a shared system of laws, command structures, and belief in Rome, could consistently rout disorganized tribal hordes or squabbling Greek city-states. It wasn't about individual genius. It was about superior collective organization based on shared Roman fictions.
That's such a crucial distinction. It really highlights how much our collective achievements, empires, cities, science rely on these shared stories, these agreed upon rules, not just on individual prowess or intelligence.
Absolutely. Another powerful example he uses is the situation in Tsarist Russia, just before the revolution around 1914.
Hmm.
You had a relatively small elite, maybe 3 million noblemen, government officials, business people, ruling over a vast population of 180 million peasants and workers.
Yeah.
How did they maintain control? Primarily through the elite's ability to cooperate effectively amongst themselves in their common interest, coupled with their deliberate efforts to prevent the vastly more numerous masses from cooperating effectively against them. They controlled the narratives, the institutions, the means of coordination.
Keeping the masses divided and disorganized.
Precisely. Now, fast forward to the Romanian Revolution in 1989. We all saw those dramatic images of Ceausescu's televised downfall, a powerful moment of mass popular dissent, huge crowds in the streets demanding change. It seemed like people power were winning out. However, Harari points out what happened next. The power vacuum created by Ceausescu's fall wasn't filled by the numerous but largely unorganized crowds. Instead, it was quickly seized by the self-proclaimed National Salvation Front, essentially a moderate, organized wing of the old Communist Party.
Wow, really? The old guard just rebadged themselves?
Pretty much. Their key advantage wasn't numbers. It was good organization and established networks allowing for flexible cooperation. Compared to the disarrayed masses on the streets, they had the experience, the connections, the shared understanding, a residual shared fiction perhaps, needed to quickly seize control of the state apparatus. It's a stark illustration that sheer numbers alone aren't enough for successful revolution or societal change without effective cooperation, which itself usually requires a unifying story or ideology. 2.2.3, when text and reality collide. The enduring power of stories.
Okay, so stories enable cooperation. But Harari makes an even stronger claim, doesn't he? That sometimes when the story, the text, the fiction collides with objective reality, it's reality that has to give way. That sounds like an extreme statement. How does that work?
It does sound extreme, but he presents compelling cases. Think about bureaucracies, for example. They use writing reports, maps, statistics to try and describe reality, maybe catalog fields or plan canals. Now, if those descriptions are inaccurate, it can cause real problems. Famines if crop yields are miscalculated, rebellions if taxes are unfair. So theoretically, the pressure of reality should lead to more truthful descriptions over time. That's the ideal.
Right, reality should correct the story.
But Harari argues it doesn't always work that way. He suggests, for instance, that the biblical worldview, despite containing what we now consider factual inaccuracies about cosmology or history, actually provided a better basis for large-scale human cooperation for centuries than the more fact-based critical histories being written by someone like the ancient Greek historian Thucydides. Why? Because the biblical story offered a powerful, cohesive narrative about meaning, morality, and divine order that could bind vast numbers of people together. He notes that even the sophisticated Greeks, 1,000 years after Thucydides, eventually adopted the Jewish Christian view, interpreting events like barbarian invasions not through political analysis, but as divine punishment for their sins. The power of the unifying story trumped factual accuracy in shaping societal understanding.
That's fascinating. The story's utility for cooperation outweighed its literal truth value. And here's a truly mind-bending example Harari uses. The donation of Constantine. What was that?
The donation. This was an incredibly influential, but ultimately completely forged document. It was supposedly an imperial decree issued by the Roman Emperor Constantine way back in 315 AD. And this decree allegedly granted the popes in Rome perpetual spiritual and temporal control over the entire Western Roman Empire.
A forged document granting the Pope control of Western Europe.
Exactly. And for centuries, literally centuries, during the Middle Ages, various popes used this fabricated document as a powerful propaganda tool to assert their political authority over kings and emperors across Europe. It was a cornerstone of papal claims to worldly power.
Even though it was fake.
Even though it was eventually proven by Renaissance scholars using textual analysis to be a forgery created probably about 400 years after Constantine supposedly wrote it. But for hundreds of years before that proof emerged, belief in the story of the donation was incredibly powerful and had very real political consequences.
So, the powerful takeaway from the donation of Constantine isn't just about a quirky historical forgery. It's a stark illustration of how a collectively believed story, even one based on outright falsehood, can become more potent, more influential in shaping reality than objective truth itself, dictating centuries of power dynamics and political legitimacy.
Precisely. It shows the sheer force of inner subjective belief. And Harari argues this isn't just some medieval curiosity. He breaks down how these powerful, reality-shaping stories often work, suggesting they typically contain three components. First, an ethical judgment, a statement about what ought to be. For the donation, it might be something like, people ought to respect ancient imperial decrees more than present-day popular opinion.
Okay, a value judgment.
Second, a factual statement, a claim about objective reality. In this case, on March 315, Emperor Constantine actually granted the popes dominion over Europe.
A testable claim, eventually.
Exactly. And third, a practical guideline telling people how to act based on the first two, for example. Therefore, Europeans living in 1315 ought to obey the Pope's commands. Now, science, Harari points out, cannot empirically test an ought statement, an ethical judgment. Values aren't scientifically verifiable, but science can investigate factual claims. And in the case of the donation, Historical and linguistic science eventually did investigate the factual claim and proved it false.
So the story relied on a factual claim that could be and was debunked.
Right, and he applies this framework in many other beliefs. Take, for example, religious injunctions against homosexuality. The ethical judgment, humans ought to obey God's commands, cannot be scientifically debated. It's a matter of faith. But the underlying factual statement about 3,000 years ago, God himself directly commanded humans to avoid homosexual activities, is potentially open to scientific and historical scrutiny regarding, say, the Bible's composition, authorship, translation, and historical context.
I see. So ethical judgments often shroud or hide underlying factual statements that are potentially debatable using scientific or historical methods.
Exactly. Think about statements like, human life is sacred. This ethical judgment often implies an underlying factual claim, like, every human possesses an eternal, indivisible soul. Or the ethical claim the American nation is sacred might imply factual claims like the USA has consistently spearheaded moral, scientific, and economic advances for all humanity. By unpacking these hidden factual claims, Harari suggests, we can subject them to rational, evidence-based examination, moving beyond purely emotional or faith-based acceptance of the overarching ethical story. 2.2.4, but it works. The yardstick of fictional goals. So these fictions, these stories, are undeniably vital for large-scale cooperation. But here's the rub. They also determine our goals. We can build incredibly elaborate, highly efficient cooperation systems, economies, armies, bureaucracies that are all geared towards serving purely fictional aims dictated by the dominant story. This forces us to ask a crucial question. What's the right yardstick for measuring the success of these systems?
Because the system itself might define success in its own terms, right?
Precisely. Harari points out how easily success metrics can be misleading because they're defined by the fiction itself. A devout Muslim mullah might point to 1.5 billion people studying the Quran as definitive proof that his religious system works. A school principal might proudly show rising standardized test scores. An ancient Egyptian official might have pointed to ever more grain collected in taxes and ever taller pyramids being built as clear signs of success. These systems do work, according to their own internal criteria, their own fictional goals.
But that success, measured by the system's own yardstick, can completely blind us to the actual quality of life, the suffering or well-being of the individuals within that system, can it?
That's exactly Harari's point. Despite the undeniable monumental achievements of ancient empires, the pyramids, the Great Wall, the aqueducts, the actual daily life of the average person in, say, AD 1850, whether a peasant in Qing Dynasty China or a factory worker in Manchester, England, was often demonstrably worse than that of their hunter-gatherer ancestors thousands of years earlier.
Worse how?
Longer working hours, much harder and more monotonous jobs, arguably less fulfilling social lives, often worse diets, and significantly poorer hygiene and sanitation leading to more disease. To illustrate this stark contrast, Harari offers this almost humorous but deeply pointed choice between two hypothetical vacation packages. A Stone Age package featuring hiking, fishing, foraging in a pristine natural environment versus a modern proletarian package involving 10 hours a day operating machinery in a noisy textile factory, followed by another 10 hours working as a cashier while learning the intricacies of bank accounts and mortgages.
Yeah, not much of a vacation.
Right. The choice highlights how our modern fiction-driven goals, economic growth, national power, corporate profit, often prioritize collective achievement, which is frequently defined by the collective fiction itself, potentially at the expense of individual human flourishing and well-being.
It's such a powerful reminder. While fiction, these shared stories are absolutely vital. I mean, without commonly accepted stories about money, states, laws, corporations, no complex human society could possibly function. These stories are ultimately tools. They are means to an end, not ends in themselves.
Exactly. That's the crucial distinction Harari hammers home. When we forget, he writes, that they are mere fiction, we lose touch with reality. And this forgetting leads directly to horrific consequences, sacrificing countless human lives to make a lot of money for the corporation or to protect the national interest, entities that ultimately exist only in our collective imagination. They are powerful tools, but dangerous masters.
Okay, so humanity has brilliantly leveraged these fictional tools to build powerful societies, overcome ancient threats, and achieve incredible things. But now, as technology accelerates at an exponential pace, these fictions, particularly the foundational liberal humanist fictions we tell ourselves about the individual self, free will, and human value, are about to be put to the ultimate, perhaps fatal, test.
Homo sapiens loses control. The challenge to humanism and liberalism. 3.1, the modern covenant. Growth as the new religion.
All right, so as we move into this final and arguably most speculative and potentially disturbing part of our deep dive, Harari argues that modern society has adopted a new, almost religious dogma, a new core belief system, and that is the unquestioning faith in economic growth. It's become our go-to universal answer for almost every societal problem.
Yeah, growth will fix it.
Exactly. The core idea here is that modernity's deep-seated faith in economic growth, fueled, crucially, by the invention of credit and a newfound trust in the future, has certainly solved many old problems, like famine, as we discussed. But it has also shaped a completely new set of values, a new kind of modern covenant that prioritizes getting more stuff, increasing production above almost all else. 3.1.1, the breakthrough of credit and trust in the future.
To really appreciate how radical this is, you have to understand how different things were before the modern era. For millennia, pre-modern societies basically operated under the assumption that overall production was stable, or grew only very, very slowly. There was little expectation that the future would be significantly better than the present or the past. Your grandchildren would likely live much like your grandparents did.
A static worldview.
Largely, yes.
Yep.
And this economic stagnation also acted as a brake on scientific progress. Why? Because there was no widespread faith in future discoveries or improvements that could possibly warrant large-scale investment now. Imagine a medieval researcher going to a banker and saying, "Lend me money to develop a cure for the plague. It'll make us rich in 20 years."
The banker would laugh him out of the room. Feed your family today.
Precisely. People needed tangible results now, using existing resources. But Harari explains that the modern age broke this centuries-old cycle through two intertwined breakthroughs: a fundamentally growing trust in the future, and the financial mechanism that embodies that trust, the miracle of credit. Credit, at its core, is the economic manifestation of trust in the future. It allows us to invest resources we don't have now into ventures based purely on the belief, the faith, that they will yield greater returns later.
It's borrowing from the future, essentially.
It is, and Harari gives this really striking modern example we touched on before. When the Ebola virus erupted in West Africa in 2014, what happened on the stock market? Shares of pharmaceutical companies that were working on potential anti-Ebola drugs companies like Tecmira and BioCryst, they skyrocketed. Tecmira went up 50%, BioCryst 90% almost overnight.
Right. Tragedy equals opportunity.
Exactly. Contrast that with the typical response in the Middle Ages when the plague hit.
Yeah.
People prayed for forgiveness, blamed sinners, maybe tried bloodletting. Today, a deadly epidemic is immediately seen, at least by some, as a potential business opportunity, fueled by the belief that human ingenuity will find a solution, and that investment in that ingenuity will pay off. This vividly illustrates our profound, almost automatic newfound trust in scientific progress and economic growth to solve problems, even horrific ones. We don't just pray anymore, we invest. 3.1.2, growth as panacea and religion. So why this relentless focus on growth? Modern politicians, economists, across the political spectrum really, insist on constant economic growth for essentially three main reasons, according to Harari. Firstly, the obvious one. So people can consume more, supposedly raise their living standards, and theoretically achieve greater happiness through material prosperity. More stuff equals more happiness is the implicit promise.
The consumer dream.
Secondly, purely demographic pressure. For a global human population that is still multiplying, significant economic growth is needed just to stay where we are, just to maintain current living standards and employment levels. He uses India as an example. With roughly 1.2% annual population growth, India needs at least 1.2% economic growth each year simply to prevent rising unemployment and falling standards of living for its existing population. Growth becomes a necessity just to tread water.
Okay, that makes sense. Constant pressure.
And thirdly, growth serves a crucial political function. It helps societies avoid making hard choices, resentment, and violence over the thorny issue of inequality. Instead of fighting over how to redistribute a fixed-sized economic pie, which inevitably creates winners and losers and breeds conflict, it's politically much easier to promise everyone a bigger pie through overall economic growth. Everyone gets a slightly larger slice, even if the relative shares remain unequal. Growth becomes the grease that keeps the potentially explosive machine of social inequality from seizing up.
So growth becomes this kind of universal panacea, this magic wand that seemingly solves everything: poverty, unemployment, even difficult ethical dilemmas about fairness and distribution.
Exactly, and this is where Harari argues the obsession with growth acquires an almost religious status. It starts to function like a new kind of religion, one that purports to solve deep ethical dilemmas simply by maximizing one value: growth. It encourages people, societies, governments to bury their ethical disagreements under the overriding imperative to prioritize actions that maximize long-term growth.
And this often means discounting or sacrificing other important values that might get in the way of growth, right?
Absolutely. Things like preserving social equality, ensuring ecological harmony, or honoring your parents, these can all become secondary concerns, obstacles to be overcome if they appear to hamper GDP growth. We've seen countless examples of this, haven't we? The destruction of vital ecological habitats for the sake of free market capitalism and resource extraction, or, in a different political system, the brutal human cost of the Soviet Union's forced collectivization drive, all justified in the name of rapid industrial growth and building communism. The belief in growth as the ultimate good, the supreme value, can end up justifying almost anything. 3.1.3 Capitalism's Unstoppable Engine.
And it feels like a system that just perpetuates itself, doesn't it? Almost like a perpetual motion machine. If you step back and ask, why can't we just be satisfied? Why can't society just say, okay, this level of consumption is enough? The answer seems embedded in the very mechanics of capitalism itself. Harari uses the example of an individual investor. Imagine you have $100,000 in savings. You can't just sit on it, can you?
Not really, no.
You're constantly looking for higher returns. You're worried about inflation eroding its value. You're anxious about missing out on the next big investment opportunity. This individual anxiety, multiplied by millions, creates this relentless pressure driving continuous investment, innovation, competition, and therefore growth. You might want to ask, why not just be satisfied? But the system itself, the logic of capital seeking returns, compels you and everyone else to constantly seek more.
It's a self-fueling engine. And Harari acknowledges that despite the incredibly stressful, often chaotic, and frequently unjust world that capitalism has created, its scandalous promises of perpetual growth and global cooperation are, in many ways, fulfilled. It has remarkably managed in the long run to largely overcome those ancient scourges of famine, plague, and war achievements that thousands of years of traditional religions with all their moral teachings and prayers couldn't manage.
That's a stark contrast he draws.
It is. He points out that for centuries, priests, rabbis, and muftis patiently explained to people why humans couldn't overcome these massive problems through their own efforts alone. Divine intervention was needed. Then along came the bankers, the investors, the industrialists, the scientists, and within a couple of centuries, they managed to do exactly what the traditional religion said was impossible. It's a powerful testament to the system's effectiveness, at least in those specific domains.
But there's always a but.
Always. This staggering success, Harari cautions, is almost always measured primarily by metrics of production and growth, often while conveniently ignoring or downplaying the potential for future ecological meltdown. The environmental cost, the long-term sustainability, these often don't appear on the capitalist balance sheet until it's too late. And this brings us to a really critical juncture in his argument. Capitalism, this engine of growth, fundamentally thrives on manipulating and satisfying human desires and human feelings. Buy this, want that, feel happy. But what happens if science, the very engine driving this growth, starts to reveal that these feelings, these desires, and indeed the very concept of an individual self experiencing them, are not at all what we've always imagined them to be? 3.2 Liberalism's Foundations Under Siege, Free Will and the Individual. And this is where Harari really starts deconstructing the foundations of modern society, particularly Western liberal democracy. We build so much of our world, especially in the West, on the bedrock philosophy of liberal humanism. This philosophy places individual human feelings, choices, and that unique inner self at the absolute center of all meaning and authority. The individual is sovereign.
Right. Follow your heart. The customer is always right. The voter knows best.
Exactly. All those core tenets.
Yeah.
But Harari explains systematically how this entire foundation is being eroded, maybe even demolished, by ongoing advances in the life sciences, biology, neuroscience, psychology, and the technologies they enable. The core idea he develops here is that science is increasingly undermining the traditional liberal belief in both free will and the existence of a single, authentic individual self. Instead, science is starting to suggest we are more like complex programmable algorithms whose choices are determined, not freely made.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge claim. Let's start with free will. 3.2.1, the myth of free will. The idea that we have free will feels incredibly intuitive, doesn't it? I mean, I feel like I'm making choices constantly. I chose to have coffee this morning. I'm choosing my words now. It feels free. But Harari marshals scientific arguments to challenge this fundamental belief, arguing that ultimately all our decisions boil down to either deterministic processes or random events or some combination, but they are never truly free in the way we typically conceive of it, as a conscious, uncaused, I'm making a choice independent of prior causes.
That's the core of the scientific challenge. When a neuron in your brain fires, triggering a thought or an action, it's either a predictable, deterministic reaction to preceding electrochemical stimuli, input from other neurons, hormones, sensor data, or it's influenced by genuinely random quantum events at the subatomic level within the neuron. Neither scenario, Harari argues, leaves any room for a mystical free will to intervene and make a decision that isn't caused by prior events or pure chance. Our decisions, then, are simply the output of these complex chains of biochemical events, maybe with a dash of randomness thrown in, but not libertarian free choices originating from some non-physical self.
Okay, that's the theory. Does he offer any experimental evidence?
He discusses several lines of evidence. One vivid example comes from experiments with what he calls roborats, conducted by neuroscientists like Professor Sanjeev Talwar. In these experiments, electrodes are implanted in a rat's brain, specifically targeting areas related to movement commands or the brain's reward center. When the scientists remotely stimulate the turn left neurons, the rat turns left. When they stimulate the reward center contingent on the rat climbing a ladder, the rat eagerly climbs the ladder.
Right, direct brain control.
Exactly. But here's Harari's crucial interpretation. The rat doesn't feel like it's being controlled like a puppet. Because the electrodes are stimulating the very neural circuits that generate the desire or intention to move left or climb the ladder, the rat wants to do these things. As far as the rat's subjective experience goes, it's acting freely, following its own desires. Harari then makes the provocative leap. Since a rat's desires are ultimately just patterns of firing neurons, does it really matter if those neurons are stimulated naturally by other neurons within its brain or artificially by external electrodes controlled by a scientist? The rat feels it's acting freely because it experiences the wanting, regardless of that want's ultimate origin. And then he implies chillingly that humans may be equally deluded about their own free will. We believe our choices are free simply because we are consciously aware of the desire or intention to act just before we act, without being aware of the complex, deterministic, or random neural processes that generated that desire in the first place. Our subjective feeling of wanting might simply be the conscious experience of our biochemical algorithms executing their predetermined or random commands. 3.2.2. The fragile self, individuals, and the split brain. Okay, so if free will is potentially an illusion, a biochemical process we misinterpret, what are the other pillar of liberalism? The idea of a single, unified, indivisible self. That core I that supposedly makes the decisions, holds the values, and experiences the world consistently over time. Liberalism fundamentally assumes that each person possesses this single, clear, and authentic voice within, an indivisible self, which is the ultimate source of meaning and authority. This belief underpins everything from the voter knows best in democracy to the customer is always right in capitalism, to romantic notions like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It all rests on the sovereignty of the individual self.
But Harari argues we're not really individuals in that sense, right? He suggests we are more like individuals. What exactly does he mean by that? How does science support this seemingly radical idea of a fragmented self?
Good question. He means we're not one single, unified, indivisible entity, but rather more like an assemblage of many different parts, different algorithms, different impulses, often competing or even unaware of each other. The life sciences challenge the notion of a permanent unified self by showing, quite simply, that our bodies are made of trillions of constantly changing cells, and our minds, our personalities, our beliefs undergo countless transformations throughout our lives. We are not static entities. We are, in Harari's view, fundamentally an assemblage of many different algorithms running on our biological hardware.
And okay, conceptually. But
Right.
is there direct experimental evidence for this fragmentation?
Yes. Some of the most compelling and frankly bizarre evidence comes from experiments with split-brain patients. These are individuals who, typically to treat severe epilepsy, have had the corpus callosum, the main bundle of nerves connecting the left and right hemispheres of their brain, surgically severed. Pioneering work by researchers like Nobel laureate Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga revealed fascinating insights into the fragmented nature of consciousness in these patients.
What do they find?
All sorts of strange things. Because the hemispheres can no longer communicate directly, they sometimes seem to operate independently, almost like two separate minds in one skull. For instance, one patient, identified as WJ, might have his right hand, controlled by the left hemisphere, reach out to open a door, while simultaneously his left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, tries to pull it closed. It reflects conflicting impulses originating in different, now disconnected parts of the brain.
Wow, literally fighting with himself.
It's exactly. Even more revealing were experiments where different information was presented simultaneously to each hemisphere. For example, patient PS might be shown a picture of a chicken claw flashed only to his right visual field, which goes to the left hemisphere, typically dominant for language, and simultaneously a picture of a snowy winter scene flashed to his left visual field, going to the right hemisphere. When asked to point, using both hands, to related pictures from a selection, his right hand might correctly point to a picture of a chicken, while his left hand correctly points to a picture of a snow shovel. So far, so good. Each hemisphere processed its input correctly.
Okay.
But then, when asked why he pointed to those specific pictures, the patient's left hemisphere, the one controlling speech and usually acting as the interpreter, would confabulate a plausible but entirely fabricated explanation to make sense of both actions, even though it had no direct access to why the left hand pointed to the shovel. PS might say something like, "Oh, that's simple. The chicken claw goes with the chicken, and you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed."
He just made up a story to connect them.
Precisely. Gazzaniga called this phenomenon the left brain interpreter. It suggests that a significant part of our conscious experience involves this constant post hoc storytelling function, primarily in the left hemisphere, that desperately tries to create a seemingly coherent narrative out of the often fragmented and contradictory inputs and outputs of our various brain modules. This strongly suggests that the unified, coherent self we experience might be largely a constructed narrative, a story we tell ourselves, rather than an inherent, indivisible entity. It highlights the constructed, rather than essential, nature of our feeling of being a single I. 3.2.3, the experiencing self versus the narrating self.
Okay, so if our brain, particularly the left hemisphere, is constantly making up stories to create a sense of coherence, which self is actually the real one? Which one should we trust? This brings us to another crucial distinction Harari borrows, this time from Nobel laureate psychologist Daniel Kahneman: the difference between the experiencing self and the narrating self. This seems key to understanding our potentially flawed self-perception.
It's absolutely key. Kahneman famously demonstrated this distinction with his, again, rather unpleasant-sounding cold water experiment. Participants had to endure two separate painful experiences. First, a short trial, immersing one hand in uncomfortably cold water, 14 degrees, about 57 degrees air, for 60 seconds straight. Then a long trial, immersing the other hand in the same 14 degrees air water for 60 seconds, but then keeping it in for an additional 30 seconds, during which the water temperature was raised slightly to a still unpleasant but less painful 50 degrees air.
Okay, so the long trial was objectively worse, right? Same amount of peak pain, plus an extra 30 seconds of less intense pain.
Yeah.
More total suffering.
Objectively, yes. More total time spent in discomfort. But here's the kicker. When participants were later asked which of the two trials they would prefer to repeat, a significant majority chose to repeat the longer, objectively worse trial.
That makes no sense. Why would they choose more pain?
It sounds completely illogical from the perspective of the experiencing self, the part of us living through moments of sensation, moment by moment. But Kahneman found that the narrating self, the part of us that remembers the past, evaluates experiences, and makes decisions about the future, operates by very different rules. The narrating self, crucially, is largely duration blind. It doesn't really sum up the total amount of pleasure or pain over time. Instead, it heavily relies on what Kahneman called the peak-and rule.
Peak-and rule.
Yeah, the narrating self judges an entire past experience primarily based on two things: the feeling at its most intense moment, the peak, and the feeling right at the very end. It then sort of averages these 2 points, largely ignoring the overall duration. Because the longer cold water trial ended slightly less painfully, 15 degrees C versus 14 degrees, the narrating self remembered it as less aversive overall and therefore preferred to repeat it, completely disregarding the extra 30 seconds of suffering the experiencing self actually endured. This bias, Kahneman argues, has far-reaching impact on all our practical decisions, from choosing vacation spots based on the happy ending photo, to medical choices, to remembering relationships.
So the storyteller in our head, the narrator, isn't necessarily an accurate record keeper of our actual lived experience. It's biased towards dramatic moments and happy endings. He mentions a similar study involving patients undergoing painful colonoscopies, right?
Yes, exactly. Patients' overall memory and evaluation of the unpleasant procedure was much more strongly influenced by the level of pain at the single most intense moment and the level of pain during the final few minutes, rather than the actual total duration of the discomfort they experienced throughout the whole thing. Doctors could even make the overall memory better by deliberately extending the procedure slightly, with a period of reduced discomfort at the very end.
Manipulating the narrating self's memory.
Precisely. And Harari argues that most of us strongly identify with our narrating self. We are the story in our head. This narrator weaves a seemingly logical and consistent yarn out of the chaotic stream of experiences that make up our lives, glossing over contradictions, editing memories, creating a coherent plot line, even if that story is full of subtle lies and self-deceptions. This constant storytelling gives us that powerful, reassuring feeling that we have a single, unchanging identity that lasts from birth to death. And this feeling directly bolsters the questionable liberal belief in a consistent, authentic inner voice that should be trusted as the ultimate authority.
Okay. But if our free will is possibly an illusion generated by biochemical processes, and our sense of a unified self is largely a fictional story confabulated by our narrating self using biased rules like peak end, then what happens when external algorithms powered by big data and AI can actually access our raw biological data, bypass the narrator spin, and potentially tell our story, understand our desires even better than we understand ourselves? This seems to be where the challenge to individualism, to liberalism itself, becomes truly profound and potentially revolutionary.
That is exactly where Harari takes us next. The rise of the algorithms. 3.3, the rise of algorithms, external authority, and the end of individualism.
Right. This is where Harari's argument gets really compelling and maybe quite alarming for some. He argues that if organisms, including humans, are essentially complex biochemical algorithms, and if humans are actually individuals with fragmented cells and unreliable narrators, then it follows logically that a sufficiently powerful external algorithm, one with enough computing power and access to enough relevant data, could theoretically know us much, much better than we know ourselves. And if algorithms know us better, authority will inevitably shift away from our flawed individual feelings and narratives towards these more objective, data-driven external systems.
Authority shifts from humans to algorithms. That's the core idea. He suggests that non-conscious but highly intelligent algorithms, fueled by the relentless accumulation of vast amounts of personal data, biological, behavioral, social, will increasingly make better decisions for us, or at least decisions that are more aligned with our deeper patterns and preferences than the ones our biased narrating selves might make. This progressive erosion of human autonomy, he warns, could lead to a fundamentally post-liberal, maybe even post-human future. 3.3.1 algorithms, knowing you better. And we're not talking about some distant future here. We're already seeing clear examples of this shift in specific domains. Take medical diagnosis, for instance. AI systems like IBM's Watson, when fed a patient's symptoms and full medical history, can already diagnose certain conditions, particularly some cancers, far more accurately and quickly than many human doctors.
Why? Because the AI isn't limited by human memory or biases.
Exactly. Human doctors are limited by what they can remember, the specific cases they've seen, how much time they have, even personal factors like whether they're tired or hungry that day. Watson, on the other hand, can instantly cross-reference a patient's specific, perhaps meager, symptoms against their entire medical history and compare it against a vast, constantly updated global database of medical literature, clinical trials, and patient records from around the world. It's simply a matter of superior data processing capacity.
That's a huge advantage.
It is. And look at automated health management. Diabetics are already using implanted glucose sensors that continuously monitor their blood sugar and communicate wirelessly with smartphone-controlled artificial pancreases, basically. Small pumps that automatically inject precise doses of insulin or glucagon as needed to keep their blood sugar stable, often without any conscious human intervention required. This offers a tangible, real-world glimpse into algorithms managing crucial aspects of our health, potentially better than we can manage them ourselves through conscious effort and guesswork.
And it's not just managing existing conditions. There's a huge push to gather more predictive data, too, isn't there? Companies like 23andMe analyze your DNA, claiming to reveal predispositions, traits, ancestry, things about yourself you might never have known.
Right. And tech giants like Google are investing heavily in health initiatives, like their Google Baseline study, aiming to collect comprehensive health data from large populations, or Google Fit, tracking our activity levels. The goal is clearly to accumulate ever more granular biometric and behavioral data about us.
Which leads to Harari's concept of the Internet of all things.
Yes, imagine a ubiquitous sensing network, perhaps run by a future version of Google or a similar entity, that watches every breath you take, every move you make, and every bond you break as the song goes. It monitors not just your online clicks, but your bank account activity, your real-time heartbeat and blood pressure, your blood sugar levels, maybe even your galvanic skin response, your sleep patterns, your social interactions, perhaps even your sexual encounters via smart devices, if such a system existed.
It will definitely know you much better than you know yourself.
That's Harari's stark conclusion. Such an algorithm wouldn't be fooled by our self-deceptions, our cognitive biases, the shortcuts taken by our narrating self, or the distortions of the peak-end rule. It would have the raw, objective data. It would remember every step we took and every hand we shook, creating a complete, dynamic database profile that could potentially far surpass the accuracy and depth of our own subjective self-knowledge. 3.3.2 algorithm as advisor and decision maker. So if these algorithms come to know us so intimately, perhaps better than we know ourselves, what roles will they inevitably start to play in our lives? Harari suggests they will increasingly move from just providing information to offering advice, eventually perhaps making decisions for us. He gives the example of choosing a romantic partner. An algorithm analyzing vast data sets on relationship success, personality compatibility, maybe even genetic markers could potentially advise you on who to marry, weighing factors far more objectively than our notoriously unreliable biochemical algorithms, infatuation, lust, societal pressure.
Right. Our evolved algorithms might, as he suggests, overemphasize superficial things like looks, giving them maybe 35% weight in our subconscious calculation, while big data analysis might reveal that looks actually only have a 14% correlation with long-term relationship success and happiness. The algorithm could give better advice.
That's the idea. Or take politics. What does this shift mean for democracy, built on the idea of the informed voter making rational choices? Harari suggests that in politics, our narrating self is just as susceptible to biases like the pecan rule. We might be swayed disproportionately by a recent tax cut, forgetting the previous 3 years, or our vote might be influenced by something as trivial as having a head cold on election day, making us feel more risk-averse or pessimistic.
So what's the algorithmic alternative?
He offers the provocative thought experiment of authorizing an algorithm, let's call it the Google vote bot, to cast your ballot for you. This algorithm, having tracked your biometric data, heart rate, blood pressure, stress levels, dopamine responses, and analyzed your reactions to news and policies over the entire 4 years, could potentially screen out manipulative political spin, compensate for your momentary biases, like feeling grumpy because of that cold, which might make you lean more conservative that day, and ultimately vote according to your deeper, real feelings and interests, as reflected in your long-term biochemical and behavioral data patterns. It would vote based on the experiencing self's data, not the narrating self's potentially flawed judgment.
That's profoundly undemocratic in the traditional sense, but maybe more rational in a data-driven sense. It's unsettling.
Deeply unsettling. And we're already seeing precursors to this everywhere, aren't we? Personal digital assistants like Cortana, Siri, Google Now, or Alexa. Amazon's incredibly sophisticated recommendation algorithms. They already know our past preferences, movies, books, music products with startling accuracy. They can predict what we'll like next, often introducing us to choices we might never have discovered on our own. We are increasingly outsourcing our discovery and selection processes to them.
And Harari even takes it a step further, saying that soon maybe books will read you. How would that work?
Well, imagine future e-readers, like a Kindle equipped with biometric sensors, eye tracking, maybe monitoring heart rate variability or facial microexpressions as you read. Such a device could monitor your reading habits in minute detail. Not just what you read, but how fast you read different passages, where you pause, where you reread, where you abandon the book entirely. Combined with the biometric data, it could potentially know what made you laugh, what made you sad, and what made you angry as you read. And if Amazon, or whoever owns the platform, aggregates this data from millions of readers, they could potentially know exactly who you are and how to turn you on and off, emotionally speaking. They could evaluate books not just based on sales, but on their precise emotional impact, and perhaps even learn how to manipulate your engagement, keep you hooked, maybe even subtly influence your thoughts and feelings through the content they recommend and how it's presented. It's a complete inversion of the traditional reader-text relationship. The text starts reading and potentially programming the reader. 3.3.3, the shifting of authority and the future of inequality.
What's crucial to grasp here, Harari emphasizes, is that this potential future isn't necessarily some dark Orwellian dystopia being forced upon us by an evil Big Brother state. Instead, it's more likely to emerge gradually, almost imperceptibly, as a result of a flood of mundane choices that we willingly make every day, trading privacy and autonomy for convenience, entertainment, and perceived benefits.
That's the insidious part. Millions, maybe billions of people already willingly give up vast amounts of privacy and individuality to live their lives increasingly online, documenting everything, sharing everything. Many become genuinely distressed if they're disconnected from the network, even for a few minutes. The authority, the locus of control and validation, is already subtly shifting from internal human feelings and judgments to external algorithms and social networks. We choose to let the algorithms guide us.
And this voluntary surrender of authority has massive implications for liberalism, doesn't it? Because it directly undermines the core liberal belief that all humans possess roughly equal value and authority. If algorithms can understand some people's biological and behavioral data vastly better than others, perhaps those who embrace the technology more fully or can afford better sensors, and if these algorithms can consequently make demonstrably superior decisions for them, what happens to the principle of universal human equality? What happens to those who can't or won't access or afford these algorithmic upgrades?
This raises an incredibly disturbing question, perhaps the most disturbing in the book. Harari paints a stark picture of potentially unprecedented biologically reinforced inequality. He uses the analogy of old train carriages. Developing countries today might have elites living in first-class carriages, enjoying lifestyles on par with developed nations, while millions languish in impoverished third-class carriages, suffering from preventable diseases and poverty, largely left behind by the global economy.
Okay.
Now, Harari speculates, and again it's speculation, but a chilling one, that in the 21st century, the global elites, the ones driving technological development, might find it far more economically efficient, albeit morally ruthless, to invest their resources in upgrading a few million wealthy people into effectively superhuman Homo Deus, rather than trying to fix the messy, complex problems of the billions of poor who are increasingly becoming, from a purely economic perspective, militarily and economically vital no longer. If AI and robots can do most jobs and automated weapons can fight wars, what economic value does a vast unupgraded human population provide to the upgraded elite?
It's the ultimate useless class scenario, a biological caste system where human value isn't inherent, but maybe algorithmically determined based on your data footprint and upgrade potential. That's truly chilling.
It is. And it points towards a possible future ideology he calls techno-humanism. This would be an updated, technologically supercharged variant of earlier evolutionary humanism, which had its own dark side in eugenics. Techno-humanism, Harari suggests, dreams of using technology not just to heal the sick, but to actively upgrade the healthy to enhance the human mind and body, giving us access to currently unknown experiences and abilities. It aims for nothing less than a second cognitive revolution engineered by us that could potentially turn Homo Deus into the lords of the galaxy.
But unlike Hitler's crude eugenics based on selective breeding and racism, Harari notes that 21st century techno-humanism would likely pursue this upgrade agenda through sophisticated tools like genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and direct brain-computer interfaces. Cleaner methods, perhaps, but potentially leading to an even greater divergence within the human species. 3.3.4, the mind gap. Unknown experiences.
But Harari injects a crucial note of caution, a profound warning amidst these visions of godlike upgrades. There's a fundamental danger lurking in this pursuit. We don't truly understand the mind itself, the nature of consciousness. How can we possibly hope to safely and wisely engineer something we don't fully comprehend? How can we aim for enhanced mental states that we can't even begin to imagine right now?
Right. It's like trying to upgrade a computer's operating system without knowing how the current one works or what the upgrade will actually do.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of the bat. We are, he says, completely oblivious to the rich, complex sensory world of echolocation experienced by a bat. We can describe it physically, scientifically, but we cannot truly imagine what it is like to be a bat, to perceive the world primarily through reflected sound waves. Similarly, Harari argues, we humans may currently be completely blind to vast spectra of potential mental states, modes of consciousness that we could potentially create through technology or, perhaps more worryingly, inadvertently destroy in our attempts to engineer ourselves.
So we're essentially building a future based on blueprints of our own consciousness that might be fundamentally incomplete or even wrong, and technology increasingly offers to fix aspects of human experience we find inconvenient, like preventing uncomfortable desires. He uses the example of maybe developing a pill or a treatment that could redirect Romeo and Juliet's forbidden, socially disruptive love into something more appropriate.
Right. Problem solved. No more messy teenage drama. But Harari asks, at what cost? Doing so would fundamentally alter, perhaps impoverish, human experience. It would solve the dramas of life by simply eliminating the inconvenient, complex, often painful desires and emotions that make us human in the first place. Techno-humanism, he points out, faces this almost impossible philosophical dilemma. It claims to uphold human feelings and experiences as the ultimate source of meaning, yet it simultaneously seeks to manipulate, control, engineer, and potentially even eliminate those very feelings in the pursuit of perpetual bliss and optimized function. It's a deeply self-contradictory path, one that could lead to a future where we are perpetually happy, but perhaps profoundly less human, less deep, less meaningful. 3.3.5 organisms as algorithms, life is data processing, dataism. And this whole line of thinking humans as algorithms, the shift of authority to data, the drive to optimize, leads Harari to identify what he sees as a powerful emerging ideology, perhaps even a new secular religion, which he calls dataism. Dataism. Okay, what are its core tenets? Dataism, in essence, sees the entire universe and everything within it through the lens of data processing. It views all organisms from bacteria to humans and all collective systems like beehives, forests, cities, economies as fundamentally being algorithms.
Mm.
And the purpose, the meaning of life itself, is simply seen as data processing. Organisms are tools for processing information, and evolution is the process of creating better, more efficient algorithms.
So humans are just one type of data processing algorithm, maybe currently the best one on Earth, but not inherently special.
Exactly. From a pure datist perspective, our subjective experiences, our consciousness, might even be seen as somewhat inefficient or irrelevant byproducts unless they directly contribute to better data processing. And this perspective can be applied to everything. Take free market capitalism, for instance. Dataism might view it not through a lens of politics or ethics, but simply as a highly effective distributed data processing system. Individual consumers and producers act like processors, and prices act as the coordinating signals, efficiently integrating vast amounts of dispersed knowledge about supply, demand, and resources. The stock exchange, in this view, becomes the fastest, most efficient data processing hub on the planet, integrating global information almost instantaneously to determine the supposedly correct price of assets.
So our entire civilization, our economy, maybe even our democracy, it all ultimately comes down to how efficiently we process information.
That's the datist interpretation Harari presents. He even suggests that, from this perspective, democracy and the free market ultimately won over more authoritarian systems like Soviet communism. Not necessarily because they were morally superior, but simply because they improved the global data processing system. They allowed information to flow more freely, more quickly, and from more diverse sources, leading to better adaptation and innovation, more efficient data processing overall. Dataism, he suggests, offers a potentially unifying scientific theory for everything, a new grand narrative for the 21st century that worships the flow of information above all else. The universe is data flow. The value of anything is its contribution to processing that data. 3.3.6 Power vacuums and the ultimate questions.
Okay, so if dataism is the rising ideology, and if traditional human institutions, governments, political parties, maybe even nation states themselves can no longer process the sheer volume and velocity of data fast enough to understand the world, let alone provide meaningful visions or make effective decisions in real time, then what happens? Harari suggests that power vacuums will inevitably open up, and new, more efficient data processing structures will evolve to fill them.
Right. He points out that no single human, no president, no CEO, no political committee can possibly grasp, let alone control, the immensely complex global data processing system we've already created. Think about trying to avert a global financial crash or stop global warming. The system is just too vast, too interconnected, too fast-moving for traditional human governance models.
So the system is becoming uncontrollable by its creators.
In many ways, yes. Which leads to the absolutely crucial question: who will build and control these new, more efficient structures? If humankind, with its slow biological brains and messy political systems, isn't up to the task of managing the complex future we're creating, perhaps, Harari writes starkly, it might give somebody else a try. Meaning perhaps non-conscious but vastly superior AI algorithms.
Handing over the reins completely.
That's the potential endpoint. Dataism, he notes with a touch of dark humor, finds typical Hollywood scenarios, where human love or intuition somehow triumphs over the cold logic of an all-knowing supercomputer utterly ridiculous. From a dataist perspective, carnal attraction between two mammals, however intense it feels to us, is just a relatively simple hormonal rush,
Right.
a predictable biochemical algorithm that wouldn't stump an advanced AI for a second.
But wait, aren't our feelings, our intuition valuable in some way? Aren't they more than just biochemical noise?
Harari acknowledges this. Our feelings love, fear, anger, passion are themselves complex algorithms honed by evolution over millions of years. They encapsulate vast amounts of practical wisdom about survival and reproduction in the environments we evolved in. So when we listen to our feelings, we are, in a way, consulting these deep, time-tested evolutionary algorithms. The question is, will these ancient biological algorithms be sufficient, or will they be superseded by external, non-conscious, data-driven algorithms that simply perform better in the new environment we've created?
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, right now as we navigate this rapidly changing world, increasingly interacting with algorithms every day? Harari doesn't give easy answers, but he leaves us, quite deliberately, with three absolutely key questions. Questions meant to stick in your mind long after this deep dive is over.
First, are organisms really just algorithms, and is life really just data processing? Is that the whole story, or is something essential being missed?
Second, what's ultimately more valuable intelligence? The ability to process data and solve problems, or consciousness, the capacity for subjective experience, for feeling, for meaning. Can you have one without the other? Which should we prioritize?
And third, the big one for our immediate future. What will actually happen to our society, our politics, and our daily lives when non-conscious but highly intelligent algorithms know us better than we know ourselves? These aren't, he stresses, distant philosophical debates for academics. They are urgent questions the answers we collectively choose, implicitly or explicitly, will fundamentally define our existence, perhaps the very future of life on Earth, as we willingly, step by step, hand more and more authority over to the algorithms we create.
Wow. Okay, what an extraordinary, and I have to say, somewhat mind-bending deep dive into Homo Deus. We've covered so much ground, traversing humanity's past triumphs over famine, plague, and war.
Which seem almost quaint now compared to the new goals.
Right. Compared to exploring our audacious new goals of immortality, bliss, and divinity, and then confronting these really profound challenges to our fundamental understanding of the self, of free will, in this dawning age of algorithms.
Indeed. Harari really forces us, to reckon with how our unique human ability to create and believe in shared fictions has driven our entire history, for better and for worse, and how the very technologies we now embrace so eagerly, coupled with unsettling scientific discoveries about consciousness and free will, are poised to fundamentally reshape what it even means to be human.
Yeah.
The journey he maps out from Homo sapiens to Homo Deus, it's not just some theoretical possibility in a sci-fi novel. He argues it's actually happening right now through countless mundane choices we all make every single day. Each click, each app permission, each new health tracker, subtly altering our collective future.
It leaves you with so much to ponder, doesn't it? I mean, those final questions he poses are just huge. Are we truly just algorithms? And is life ultimately just data processing? Is that all there is?
A chilling thought, if true.
And what do you, listening right now, value more, raw intelligence or subjective consciousness? We might not be the same thing. And what really happens day to day when these non-conscious hyper-intelligent algorithms genuinely know you, your desires, your weaknesses, better than you know yourself, it's a future that demands our serious attention right now.
Absolutely. The book, as you said, doesn't offer easy answers. There's no simple roadmap here. But it compels us, urgently, to engage with these monumental questions with our eyes wide open. As algorithms increasingly guide our choices from what news we see, to who we date, to maybe even how we vote, and as the lines between objective reality, subjective experience, and intersubjective fiction continue to blur, we must consciously decide what kind of future we actually want to build.
Yeah, and critically, what role, if any, our messy, irrational, wonderful, terrible human feelings and our potentially fictional selves will play in it?
Exactly. Will we remain the authors of our own ongoing human story, or will we become merely characters, maybe even just data points, in an algorithm's grand, unfolding, perhaps incomprehensible design?
A truly thought-provoking, essential deep dive into the future Harari envisions. Thank you so much for joining us.